Objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess subject to the call of the chair. Pursuant to Clause 2 of House Rule 11, and without objection, the chair announces that he may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered. The chair recognizes himself for an opening statement. Good morning and welcome to the first House Natural Resources Committee hearing meeting of the 118th Congress. I've served on this committee since I first came to Congress, and it's an honor to begin this year as chairman. I look forward to working with each of you and with Ranking Member Grijalva to advance our bipartisan goals. You'll find some of the most talented men and women in Congress right here on the Natural Resources Committee, each of whom brings a unique perspective and skill set to the table. Their districts range from rural to urban, from east to west, but we all have one thing in common, and that's that we need to be good stewards of the incredible resources with which America has been blessed. I have no doubt that we'll have our fair share of political disagreements and maybe even some showdowns in this Congress, but I'm hopeful we can all come to the table and advance legislation that benefits every American, regardless of our zip codes. We have an incredible responsibility to manage our lands, waters, and other resources in a way so that we can help America to thrive and to realize the benefits and the blessings of those resources. We need to open up our public lands. We need to expand recreational opportunities for all Americans. We need to promote economic development for public lands communities. I look forward to advancing legislation in the 118th Congress that increases access to our nation's lands and waters. We must also unlock the energy and mineral resources our nation has been blessed with. The United States leads the world in producing these natural resources, not only producing them, but producing them effectively and efficiently and with the highest labor and environmental standards. There's absolutely no reason that the United States should beg for resources from Saudi Arabia and the Chinese Communist Party when we can produce them right here at home. We will have to address tough issues regarding the concept of not in my backyard policies. And we'll have to have an honest conversation and one that I'm sure will bring spirited debates on the roles of domestic fossil fuel production, on mining, and on technological advances that can help us all to have a better quality of life, to have a cleaner, safer climate, and a general prosperity of our country by utilizing these resources that we, again, have been so blessed with. We need to work closely with tribal and insular communities to promote economic opportunity, ensure that they have access to resources necessary for them to thrive. We need to address systemic drought issues and promote drought resiliency in the West. Left unchecked, droughts drive food prices sky high, impact family farmers' ability to make a living, and contribute to catastrophic wildfires and turn millions of acres into ash every year. And of course, we need to conduct long overdue oversight into our federal agencies. The Biden administration has gotten far too comfortable with one-party rule in Washington, and I, for one, have some questions. These are questions that the American people deserve to know the answers. They deserve to know how their tax dollars are being spent and what this administration's plan is to reduce inflation. We intend to get those answers. But before we can get into the legislative issues we're all excited to tackle, we first must organize and take care of committee business. I'm looking forward to adopting our committee rules today and our oversight plan early next week and getting to work on the many important issues our constituents elected us to tackle. I know that we have lots of great work to do ahead of us, and I look forward, again, to working with each of you to accomplish it. I also want to note that this committee is going to work very hard. We hope to have not only hearings here in Washington, D.C., but we want to go out to America where these resources exist, and we want to have field hearings. And I hope that you all will do your schedules in such a way that you can participate in these field hearings, that we can get out and really see the bounty of resources that we have and the responsibilities that we have to take care of those resources. We're going to get to work quickly. We're going to have a hearing next Tuesday. It'll be a full committee meeting on the consideration of the authorization and oversight plan for the 118th Congress, and then we will get to business on Wednesday at 10 a.m., a full committee oversight hearing entitled Unleashing America's Energy and Mineral Potential, followed up by a hearing on Thursday, February 9th at 9 a.m. on the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. It will be an oversight hearing entitled Dependence on Foreign Adversaries, America's Critical Minerals Crisis. I now recognize Ranking Member Grijalva for any opening statement he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations on the chairmanship and the support from your conference for that position. It's a privilege, and I look forward to working with you in this coming session. It's an honor for me to serve again as ranking member of the committee. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the support of my colleagues in our caucus. And I got to, be straight up with you. I don't enjoy the idea of passing the gavel on to you, Mr. Chairman. But it is, that's the will of our democracy, and that's the will of the voters. They made a decision for the next 2 years, I hope, that we lost that part of the election, the majority in this House, and appropriately so, your conference has chosen you to be their chair. I don't like it, but I respect it and accept it, because that is how it should work, and that is how it does work. And so, congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, Mr. Chairman, last Congress we advanced some bipartisan legislation across all areas under the committee jurisdiction, and I look forward to, as does the members of our side, look forward to working with you and with individuals on the majority to see where that common ground is. And we agree with you, including the oversight to hold our federal government to the highest standards. We certainly agree with that as well. And we look forward to see where that common ground is. There will be a number of disagreements. Some of them have already played out. Just last week, H.R. 21, by passing the Strategic Production Response Act, the majority has already voted that front and center of the agenda is to expand oil and gas drilling in federal lands and waters, period. All the while, checking off items that big oil has been demanding of this committee and this Congress for year upon year. And if last week is any indication of what the next 2 years are going to be like, Mr. Chairman, I'm deeply concerned about that, and hope that, as the election indicated, there is a close opinion among the American people as to the direction of the country. It is not, to consult and to listen to almost half of the American people who feel that there is an importance in protecting and conserving our fragile lands and waters, that this committee does indeed play a very critical role in the climate action that's necessary to mitigate the impacts of the climate crisis that we're confronting in this country, and that this committee, within its jurisdiction, has much to do about the issues of equity in Indian country, about the issues of access and recreation for the American people, about issues of fairness and justice for communities that have been left out of the process, and more importantly, for that public process, for the ability of American people and their communities to have a say in their public lands and their public assets. So on those areas, we look forward to working with you. We think it is important, but we also, as stakeholders that we are in this, as members of Congress, we also believe that we will be loyal and I hope effective opposition when it comes to retreating from the realities that we face within our jurisdiction, the realities of climate, the realities of demand, and the realities of our time now, and the importance of what we do in this committee. It is an important committee, Mr. Chairman. You know that, and I know that, and I'm sure the members of this committee do that. And the work that we do here is going to be carefully examined and carefully judged. I know that all the members here value the natural, the cultural, the historic resources which this country has been blessed with. And I look forward to working with you to protect those resources for the generations that are not here with us today. And with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member, and I do look forward to working with you on some of those suspension bill top projects that we did last Congress. We did find some areas for bipartisan agreement, and as you noted and as I noted, these are issues that we're passionate about. They invoke a lot of emotion and passion a lot of times, and I'm sure we will have spirited debates. I would like to take time to introduce our new members. I want to start with our freshman members. We have Jen Kiggins representing Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. We have Delegate Jim Moylan representing Guam. Congressman Wesley Hunt representing Texas' 38th Congressional District. Congressman Mike Collins representing Georgia's 10th Congressional District. Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna representing Florida's 13th Congressional District. Congressman John Duarte representing California's 13th Congressional District. And Congressman Harriet Hageman representing the state of Wyoming. I'm also excited to welcome back several members who are returning to Natural Resources after some time away serving on other committees. Congressman Doug LaMalfa from California and Congressman John Curtis from Utah, who's probably on at another committee hearing right now. In total, our members represent 20 different states and territories each with its own unique resources and priorities. I believe we have an unchosen obligation to steward these resources well, and I look forward to working alongside each of you towards that goal. I now recognize Mr. Gahalva for the introduction of his new minority members on the committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I want to welcome 5 talented new members to the Natural Resources Committee and part of the Democratic team on this committee. We're very fortunate in bringing onto the committee some outstanding members with a lot of experience and a lot of expertise to add to this committee. Our first new member is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's from Bronx, New York. She is a leader in Congress, and she has a proven record on the issues under this jurisdiction, and we welcome her voice, and we welcome her presence here. The other is next is Representative Kevin Mullen, a newly elected member from San Mateo, County, California. He has a strong and successful record as a member of the California Assembly, where he helped protect the state's natural resources. His experience in these issues is going to be an asset as we deal with climate mitigation strategies to fight, in particular, sea level rise and what kind of restoration initiatives are going to be necessary around that area. So welcome. Representative Van Hoyle joins us from Oregon's 4th District, and newly elected member with also a proven track record. Before joining us, she served as Oregon Commissioner of Labor. Prior to that, she served as a member of the Oregon House of Representatives, including a term as House Majority Leader. She helped expand Oregon's Clean Fuels Program and pass a bill to phase out coal power and double Oregon's renewable portfolio standard for electric utilities. We welcome her, and a tremendous asset on clean energy and clean assets. Representative Sydney Kamlager Dove represents Los Angeles City and the county. She previously served in the California State Assembly and the State Senate, where she was a strong supporter of immediate climate action and for racial justice and equity. Her experience as a champion of these issues will be incredibly valuable to the committee and in our continued fight to bring understanding and action on environmental justice. Representative Seth Magaziner joins us from Rhode Island, where he served as General Treasurer of the state for 8 years. He has delivered results by investing in clean energy and infrastructure, including finance programs that have helped cities and towns build out solar, wind, and climate resiliency projects. We welcome him, and we welcome the expertise that he brings, particularly in the importance about green jobs and the interface with climate resilience. I think his expertise will be very, very important to all of us. So we're glad to welcome them, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for time to introduce them.
Thank you again, Ranking Member Grijalva, and I've obviously had time to get to know the new Republican members of the dais a little better, but I welcome all members and look forward to getting to know our colleagues across the aisle as well. And I look forward to a productive 118th Congress. It is now my pleasure to recognize the designation of Congressman Doug Lamborn from Colorado as Vice Chairman of the committee. We appreciate his willingness to take on this leadership position, even though he's also at another committee at the moment. On Energy and Mineral Resources, we have Chairman Pete Stauber and Vice Chairman Wesley Hunt. Their states have vast untapped energy and mineral potential, and I know they will be champions of responsible development. On federal lands, we have Chairman Tom Tiffany from Wisconsin and Vice Chairman John Curtis from Utah. With broad jurisdiction over everything from forestry to national parks, these men will be leaders in expanding access to the lands that we cherish. On Indian and Insular Affairs, we have Chair Harriet Hageman from Wyoming and Vice Chair Jennifer Gonzalez Colon from Puerto Rico. Both of them have valuable insight into the unique challenges tribal and insular communities face, and I know they will champion a path forward. On Oversight and Investigations, we have Chairman Paul Gosar and Vice Chairman Mike Collins. The Biden administration has again gotten too comfortable with a lack of transparency, and this subcommittee will use every available tool to hold them accountable. On Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries, we have Chairman Cliff Bentz and Vice Chair Gene Kiggins. This subcommittee is immensely important in addressing issues ranging from western drought to wildlife management, and I believe this leadership will play a pivotal role in finding solutions that work for all of America. Clearly, there is no shortage of work to be done here on the Natural Resources Committee, and I'm honored to lead a fantastic group of men and women who care about these issues and are passionate about bringing wins home to their districts. I now recognize Ranking Member Grijalva to introduce his Vice Ranking Member and Subcommittee Ranking Members.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to introduce first the new Vice Ranking Member. Excuse me. That would be Representative Sidney Camlonger Dove will serve as the Vice Ranking Member. For the subcommittee ranking members, Representative Jared Huffman will serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries, hopefully an area in which we can continue the progress that has been made over the last two sessions. Representative Jonah Goose will serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Federal Lands. Representative Teresa Ledger Fernandez will serve as ranking member of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs. And Representative Melanie Stansberry will serve as ranking member on the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations. And sure to be a committee that, despite its title, will probably be very dull, Melanie. I mean, I don't think much is going to happen there, but nevertheless, your leadership and your expertise and your command of the issues is going to be something that will contrast very well with what else goes on in that committee. And Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will serve as ranking member on the Subcommittee on Energy and Mineral Resources. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Grijalva. And I would like to note that to the freshman Democrat members, you've got some good Arkansas peanut brittle, and because of supply chain issues, I have an IOU to my other colleagues on the dais here, but there'll be plenty of brittle to go around in due time. Our next item of business
That's pretty good.
is the consideration of the proposed committee rules. Copies of the rules were circulated to members' offices last week. Without objection, the proposed rules will be considered as read and open to amendment at any point. Does any member wish to be recognized for purposes of debate on the proposed rules?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Galva, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you have said today, this is an important meeting needed to approve the rules for the House Committee on Natural Resources to be able to conduct its business. I must express some amazement with the manner that this meeting has been handled. Last Congress, the Democratic majority provided our proposed rules to the Republican majority weeks before conducting the organizational meeting where we were to consider the approval. The minority was provided ample time to review, consult with each other as a conference, and develop suggestions and recommendations to those rules. As a result, you and I were able to negotiate on 10 changes that you requested. We met some of the requests in full, and we gave partial concessions to all the others. I think we can achieve constructive bipartisan compromises like that when members are provided adequate notice and consultation on committee business. However, the new majority shared this proposed rules just this Friday evening. I understand that I understand that the chaotic speaker selection has put everything behind the normal schedule. The answer should be to acknowledge that reality and push back today's meeting accordingly. Instead, we are organizing before we are truly ready. That said, I'm encouraged by your decision not to proceed with marking up the authorization and oversight plan today as originally planned. I think I speak for all the committee members in welcoming your commitment going forward that the majority will be sharing information with the same courtesies and the same timelines that we extended to our Republican colleagues when they were in the minority. Now, turning to the substance. Unfortunately, I have concerns with the proposed rules for the committee this Congress. For one thing, I see that the new majority will be removing the prohibition, firearms, explosives, and other weapons in the area. Personally, I'd be willing to compromise with the chair if we would assure a waiting period and background checks, but I think that would be somewhat of a fair compromise. But instead, I'm just going to focus on two topics which I will be addressing in amendments. The issue with the firearms prohibition will be also dealt with in another amendment. Specifically, I'm proposing amendments that pertain to the chair's subpoena authority and the participation of remote witnesses, which I will discuss in a few minutes. These concerns are significant enough to prevent me from supporting the rules, and I urge members to vote against the rules as proposed. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Grijalva. And we are ready to get to work on the Republican side of the dais. And I know you got the rules package last Friday, as every member did, and that falls well within the House rule of 3 days' notice. I regret we couldn't give you as much notice as you gave us last time, but we are ready to get to work, and we're going to do that. And does any other member wish to be recognized to speak about the rules? It's now in order to consider amendments to the proposed committee rules. Are there any amendments to the proposed committee rules?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I would like to propose what I consider to be a very simple amendment. It's basically to assure all committee members that the ability to clarify and expand on any information provided by witnesses. If witnesses were allowed to leave, then we're forced to assume meaning and limited to what we can glean from that testimony just based upon our own opinions and decisions. So this amendment simply says that any witness appearing before the committee shall remain available for questioning by the committee unless otherwise excused by the chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Rosendale. Is there further discussion of the amendment?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Ranking member?
Thank you. I'm not opposed to the amendment per se because I think it's somewhat redundant. I note that Housing Committee rules and practices already require witnesses stay until they're dismissed. I would assume that the common courtesies that are extended to other members when they come and testify with their bills before us and they leave as soon as they're done due to the fact that they have other pending businesses, I would assume those common courtesies and extensions of courtesies, Mr. Chairman, would remain under the purview of the chair and be extended as we always have. Like I said, I don't have no grave opposition to this amendment. Like I said, I think it's redundant, but nevertheless, I would let each member make their own mind on this one. I don't have a recommendation. Yes?
Does the gentleman yield back?
Yeah, I'm yielding whatever time I have to.
All right.
I just had a question about how this would be enforced. Do you intend to have Sergeant-at-Arms here to detain them? Or you'll just wrestle them down? Totally kidding.
Are you,
Do you yield to the gentleman?
Through the chair or
Yes,
the offer of the amendment.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I don't think it's necessary to have the Sergeant at Arms here. The main thrust of this is to establish expectations, so when a witness comes in and provides this testimony, that they know the expectation is for them to maintain and to stay here until the hearing has concluded, so that the members around this committee can actually pose questions to them. Again, the chair is going to have the flexibility to dismiss if someone needs to attend something else in communications with the ranking member to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Again, I do not believe that it's going to be necessary to keep Sergeant at Arms here, but I don't think that if you don't establish those expectations, then it does allow for people to come in and think that they're able to testify and then just get up and leave. And that's not in the best interest of this committee. I do not believe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady yield back.
Yes, and if I may, Mr. Chair, the point that I made earlier, we have extended here, Mr. Chairman, as you know, common courtesies to both Democrats and Republican members when they come and testify about a particular bill that they have at the beginning of a hearing. They leave almost immediately upon their presentation. That has been a courtesy so they could go on with their job. My question, Mr. Chairman, remains, is that common courtesy still extended? Yield, sir.
Gentleman yields back. This is a common sense amendment, and it would simply add one sentence to Committee Rule 4A to make clear that witnesses who testify before the Committee on Natural Resources are expected to remain before the committee until member questions are complete or the witness is excused by the chair. And this amendment stems from something that happened in the last Congress, and I wish the amendment wasn't necessary, but we had a witness appearing virtually before this committee, and they just closed their laptop when they were confronted with the inconvenient facts during the question period. They left without being excused and without prior notice, and as a result, questions weren't answered that many members had questions for that individual. This amendment puts both members and witnesses on notice that such behavior is unacceptable, and it does leave discretion to the chair to excuse people in certain circumstances. I do urge my colleagues to support this amendment, and I thank Mr. Rosendale for offering it. Does any other member wish to be recognized? Mr. Stauber.
Yeah, for just reference, it was a while back where a colleague on the other side of the aisle, who was not a member of the House, came and testified on a bill that she had moved forward. And before I was able to question her, and it was specifically an anti-mining bill. She had left her seat, so I couldn't ask the questions that I wanted to. So I think this is a really, really good bill, and I think it will help us all. And I think the expectations when we ask our witnesses to come in, that they agree to those expectations. And I yield back.
Any other member wish to be recognized? You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a clarifying question. You mentioned that this puts members and witnesses on notice. So is the expectation also that members stay for the entire hearing as well?
That's the expectation on the Republican side of the dais, but I think that's a common expectation when you come to Congress and we have committee hearings. You should be here representing your district and doing the work on the committee. We obviously know that many of us are on multiple committees and we have conflicts. Sometimes there will be a hearing in one committee and a markup in another committee, so you have to prioritize that. But in order to do the people's business, it is important that we show up to meetings, that we have vigorous debate, and that we vote. So Mr. Grijalva may have different expectations for the left side of the dais, but I'm encouraging all of my members to show up whenever possible. Does any other member wish to be recognized? Mr. Huffman.
Mr. Chairman, congratulations for being the chair. Wishing you a productive, successful session here. I hope all members stay through all our hearings and remain in their seats. That is a standard that has been honored in the breach in the past, regardless of who's in the majority, but that would be great if we can keep everyone engaged and in the room through every hearing and every witness. But I'm going to yield the balance of my time to Chair Grijalva on this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mr. Chairman, based on the kind of rambling definition of what would, in terms of if a member came, they would be required to stay here until the duration of the meeting, or another situation. Based on that clarification, then this amendment's not redundant. It's setting a very interesting precedent for every other committee in Congress. And with that, I would urge a no vote.
Gentlemen, yield back.
Yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does any other member wish to be recognized? If there is no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Rosendale. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the amendment is agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. I recognize Ranking Member Grijalva for the purpose of offering an amendment. And without objection, the amendment is considered as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And issuing a subpoena is a big deal. A subpoena can change a person's life profoundly, altering their careers, costing them tens of thousands of dollars or more in legal fees. Oversight is a critical function of this committee, but subpoenas must be taken very, very seriously. When I was chair of this committee, I reached an agreement with then Ranking Member Bishop about the committee's subpoena authority. Instead of allowing the chair to issue a subpoena with no restrictions, we agreed with Mr. Bishop that the minority could get 7 days' notice before it was issued, along with the written justification for the subpoena. We also agreed that the committee would veto the subpoena if over half of the members in the committee signed a letter requesting a meeting to vote on it instead. At the beginning of the last Congress, it was time to vote on the committee rules again. Ranking Member Westerman continued Mr. Bishop's opposition to a fully unilateral chair subpoena, and he even expressed concerns about Mr. Bishop's compromise. Let me remind the chair that he was very concerned that he offered an amendment filed by Representative Gosar to give himself, as ranking member, full veto power over any such subpoenas. In his remarks, he said, quote, As you know, subpoenas are a very powerful investigatory and oversight tool, and that's why the committee rules have historically required votes by members of the committee before issuance of any subpoena. Such a powerful tool warrants at least concurrence with the ranking member to prevent abuse of power and undue harm from the individuals being subpoenaed. He went on to say, quote, "The rules are, as proposed today, leave every one of our constituents vulnerable to the unchecked power of the chairman and potentially of all future chairmen of this committee," quote unquote. Now, yet the committee rules we're considering today remove even the minority safeguards that were negotiated with Mr. Bishop and Mr. Westerman, given unfeathered subpoena authority to the chair. No 7-day notice, no chance for committee members to show that a majority of the members wish to debate and vote on the matter, no requirement for a justification for the subpoena, not even a requirement that the chair inform members even after the subpoena has gone out. There's no check and there's no balance. My amendment would not take us all the way back to the chair's original position on this committee's subpoena authority. It does not demand that the ranking member have veto power on a subpoena of the chair. Instead, it puts a very modest check in place, the same check that has been there for 3 years at the request of my Republican colleagues. The only way to prevent a subpoena from being issued under the amendment is if a majority of the members on the committee request an opportunity to discuss and vote on it. It's common sense. If the committee doesn't support a subpoena, it shouldn't be issued. I, for one, know that democracy is a priority for the American people, and I urge adoption of the amendment, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking member yields back. I recognize myself. I oppose this amendment. We have safeguards in the House rules that already exist to ensure that the ranking member has notice before acting under the color of subpoena authority. For example, if a subpoena is used to compel witness testimony at a hearing before the committee, House rules already require a 7-day notice of such hearing. To the extent a subpoena is used to effectuate a deposition, the regulations for the use of deposition authority require consultation with the ranking minority member and 3 days' notice specifying the date, time, and place of examination. If adopted, the amendment would serve the sole purpose of frustrating the committee's oversight obligations as we work to hold the Biden administration accountable. And I would note in the last Congress, we sent over 200 letters to the Biden administration, and we got very few replies back, and most of the time, none of those replies were sufficient. Again, oppose this amendment and urge my colleagues to do the same. Does any member wish to be recognized to speak on this amendment? Mr. Neguse, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. First and foremost, want to congratulate the chairman on his ascension to the chairmanship. Know him to be someone who cares deeply about this institution and the issues that this committee in particular debate and consider, and looking forward to working with him in the 118th Congress. With that being said, I wonder if the chairman might engage in a brief colloquy. I just want to better understand the nature of your opposition to the amendment that was suggested by the ranking member, which I think is reasonable. It sounds like you're saying, on the one hand, that you believe it's superfluous because of protections under the House rules. I'm not sure I agree with that. But then on the other hand, suggesting that it would frustrate the ability of the majority to pursue its oversight capabilities. And it sounds like it's hard for it to do both. So I just, are you saying these protections already exist, or are you saying they don't exist and it would frustrate your ability to be able to do the work you'd like to do?
I'm saying the House rules provide protection if a deposition is required or if a hearing is required from a subpoena. It does do away with the previous rule that consultation with the minority before issuing a subpoena.
Well, yeah, I appreciate your answer. I would say, as my colleague from California was astutely pointing out, there are a variety of different scenarios in which a witness may come before this body and may be subpoenaed, and those scenarios I don't think are contemplated by the House rules, which is why this safeguard, I think, was adopted in the first place in prior Congresses by then Ranking Member Bishop and by Chairman Grijalva. Look, I mean, majority gets to express its will via the rules of this committee. I would just simply say, I think in particular there's some new freshman members whom I haven't met yet and haven't had the privilege of welcoming to the Congress, but we're talking a lot about precedent these days, the last couple of weeks, and of course we'll be doing that today and tomorrow on the floor. And I think this sets a dangerous precedent. Majorities change, and to the extent that another political party gets a majority, the new precedent on this committee will be no consultation with the ranking member on subpoenas, which seems like a precedent that I suspect some of my colleagues on their side would be a little bit uncomfortable with, just again, given my experience working with them in the past. So I'd hope you all would reconsider. Doesn't seem like a big deal to require written notice and consultation with the ranking member. And of course, you have a majority. So to the extent that there's an effort to try to overturn a subpoena, only a majority can do it, and we don't have one. So I don't know that that would be awfully subversive to the agenda that you all are trying to pursue. With that, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's concern, but there are a lot of precedents that have been changed in this Congress, and we feel a deep need to have rigorous oversight. And as you said, elections do have consequences, and eventually we may be back in the minority someday. Hopefully that will be a long time from now, but I do again urge adoption of this amendment. Does anybody else wish to be recognized?
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Ledger-Fernandez.
And let me share in everybody's congratulatory notes on your ascension to chair of this committee. And we have talked on many issues before, and your commitment to many of the things that we cover. I look forward to having wonderful conversations about fish and wildlife as we move forward. I guess I'm a little concerned in the sense that I often go home and talk about the bipartisan nature of the work we do. Because indeed, so much of our work is bipartisan. It doesn't always get across. But, like 95% of my votes in last Congress were actually bipartisan votes on the floor of the House. And the subcommittee on Indigenous, which is now subcommittee on, you changed the name back to Subcommittee on Indian Affairs and Insular. But, the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples was like one of the most bipartisan committees that I'd heard about and knew about. I love the way we did that work. And Don Young, as the ranking member, I think helped provide that kind of sense of bipartisanship and collaboration and conversation. Ranking member Obernolte did as well, and I'm looking forward to working with the new chair of that subcommittee. But I guess I don't understand why it is necessary to remove consultation and collaboration. It's all about conversation. And if we want to work in a bipartisan nature, as the American people want us to, they tell us over and over again, can't you get together and talk about the issues and resolve them? And that's what looks like the existing rule that is proposed to be changed does. It's about conversation and collaboration. It doesn't strip the chair of the power to actually issue the subpoena, but it removes the ability to have those conversations that are so key to our ability to move forward in a bipartisan nature. And for that reason, I will be opposing the rule. But I would ask the chair what the problem is with having that conversation and consultation towards that goal that the American people want us to do in terms of collaboration and bipartisanship.
I appreciate the gentlelady's willingness to work together as we move forward, and I think we all miss the late Don Young and his leadership over the years on this committee. I do, again, oppose this amendment. We had many requests in the last Congress. There was really no help from the majority in the last Congress, and with the Democrat-controlled House and the Democrat administration, there was very little use of the subpoena power in the last Congress. So, again, I oppose the amendment and ask if there's any others who wish to be recognized. Mr. Fulcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to say that it's really encouraging to hear our colleagues on the other side of the aisle talk about bipartisanship. We haven't had that for a while. And so just thank you for doing that. And hopefully a new precedent will be set there moving forward with this committee. But in terms of the amendment itself, each of us were given a certain responsibility when we were elected. And that was to make decisions, and those decisions are going to have ramifications. Same thing with the chairman. And just as a reminder, if someone does get subpoenaed, they're going to be questioned by everybody per House rule on both sides of the dais. And that's the way it should be. I think the checks and balances are more than sufficient. And to that extent, I oppose this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Does anybody else? Mr. Huffman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that I'm surprised by this rule change. We've heard that elections have consequences. Well, you know, our elections, when we won the majority, had consequences too. We could have put in place, you know, extreme mechanisms to allow unfettered subpoena power without any input or debate or notice from the minority party, but we didn't do that. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. We could have done that during the Trump administration when we had some interest in oversight. So, Mr. Chairman, you are by nature a thoughtful person. I like working with you. I've been to your district. I think we have great conversations, and I know you value that engagement and dialogue. I think you're a problem solver by nature. And that's why this seems so incongruous, so out of step with who you are. Certainly it's out of step with anything that previous Congresses and previous natural resource committees have done with subpoena power. And I would really urge you to reconsider this particular rule change. You can make this change if you want to. It doesn't mean you should. And I think it's going to have a very, very unfortunate impact on our ability to work together, and will just be a further partisan poisoning of the well in an institution that has had far too much of that in the past. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I do appreciate your kind words and your willingness to want to work together. This isn't unprecedented. We surveyed other committees, and several committees in Congress have this rule, so I don't see it as extreme in that regards. Does any other member wish to be recognized? Ms. Dingell, do you wish to be recognized?
Well, first of all, I do want to congratulate you, and I'm glad that you said that we were going to work in a bipartisan way, but some of us have been committed from the very moment we walked into this room in working in a bipartisan way, because our natural resources are not Republican or Democrat. They are the most important thing that we have. And as everyone knows, Mr. West is my dear friend. I can't wait to work with him. I want to get RAWA done this Congress, and he's committed to working with me on that. And I'm very grateful for that. I hope we organize some fishing trips. And I bet the women can beat the men. So I'm going to count on you over there. But having said that, I am concerned, because I do think we're setting a tone here that's going to make it clash. You know, for the past two Congresses, the Democrats have been committed to working across the aisle to find ways to work in a fair and bipartisan manner. And look, I'm not old, but I'm seasoned. And I've watched this House from many different perspectives. And you might remember I was married to one of the kings of oversight. But he believed in fairness at all times and always consulting with his Republicans. And I look over there and I want to see Don Young. And I bet Don and John are looking down on us right now and approving. But not of this, though. Recognizing the important role that subpoenas have in holding our federal government in the highest standards. And we do need, I don't care who's in power, oversight matters. And that's our job in the Congress. But committee Democrats proposed allowing the chair last time to issue subpoenas without a vote, with very significant limitations, more than are here. And when this authority was proposed in both the 116th and the 117th committee rules, and by the way, last time we gave you 24 days notice ahead of time, you immediately opposed it. So we worked with you. We implemented safeguards that stated the chair could issue a subpoena without a vote only after consulting with the ranking member by providing 7 days of notice, the text of the subpoena, and the justification for it. We agreed to that because that's what Republicans wanted. And on top of this, we even implemented an additional guardrail to allow a majority of committee members to veto a subpoena by signing a letter asking the chair to hold a vote on it instead. We gave you that power because it matters that we all work together when we are doing this kind of work. It's important, and we should not weaponize it. Well, we're going to, but to our surprise, the rules proposed today scrap those guardrails and implement the exact unilateral subpoena authority that you said was unreasonable. You all said it was unreasonable for the last 4 years. Under the proposed rules, the chair can issue a subpoena without a vote and without notifying any member. And that's unprecedented for this committee. It just is. So it's not how the Natural Resources Committee has ever worked. I just believe it's not how we should operate. I think all he's trying to do is not restore all of the guardrails, just some of it. And I urge my colleagues to at least look at that because I am committed to working with all of you because we've really got some real work to get done. And we will, and I know you mean that. So with that, I yield back my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? Mr. Graves?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, Mr. Chairman, I want to congratulate you and getting the chairmanship and having the gavel. Really excited about working with members of this committee under your leadership this year. I remember this discussion 2 years ago. I do. I remember intimately sitting here discussing some of the erosion of the minority's role or power in the subpoenas that we had last year. And I mean, it's amazing to me because you just flip this whole thing over. You do. You flip the whole thing over. And Mr. Huffman, come on, my man. The great thing is all this is preserved on video, so we can just go back and watch it. And look, I agree with Mr. Neguse. I agree with Ms. Dingell. The way that we're going in a race to the bottom. We are, and no doubt about it. But it is fascinating to me the way that the roles reverse in the majority and the minority. You suddenly just adopt the other person's arguments. To sit here and look at my friends across that are talking about us working in a bipartisan manner, look, I don't know who y'all are kidding. You've been on this committee. This committee is one of the most partisan committees in Congress. It is. We sat here and watched all last Congress. We watched all last Congress as y'all sat there and unilaterally, in a partisan manner, raised royalty rates, increasing energy costs for Americans. We sat there and watched where you carried out policies blocking domestic energy production, only putting a preference in place for foreign energy sources, undermining the energy security of the United States. We watched you block conventional sources of energy only to turn and become more dependent upon Russia. How'd that work out? Now to implement the IRA, which, look, y'all sit there and talk about science. I am all on board for more science. Because when you apply more science, the targets and the objectives that you all have established under the Inflation Reduction Act that I remind you, John Kerry came out and said doesn't have a damn thing to do with inflation, as we said all along. Once again, unilateral bill, unilateral decisions that have had a profound impact on Americans all across this country. Driving up energy cost, my favorite, increasing emissions, not decreasing them, and undermining U.S. energy security by making us more dependent upon countries like China, Russia, but now you've changed that a bit. So look, we're in a race to the bottom. We are. But I'll also tell you, looking at the profound impact that some of these unilateral and partisan policies have had on Americans, we have got to act quickly to reverse the damage that's being caused. Record inflation, record energy prices. If I remember right, when Biden was sworn in, I think gasoline prices at the lowest were $1.72 a gallon. $1.72 a gallon in my home state. And look at where they are now. You are seeing people that can least afford it being challenged in the most profound ways with energy cost, with refueling their cars, and a grocery costs everything. So I do think that we need the ability to act quickly, to act urgently. But look, let's be honest with each other. Let's be really honest with each other. This committee is one of the most partisan committees in Congress. All last year and the year before, y'all didn't give a damn about what we thought. All the big bills moved on a unilateral basis. And to sit here and suddenly start preaching this bipartisan stuff, I mean, I'd ask any of you, give me 5 things that you did on a bipartisan basis in this committee. Give them to me. Anybody. Rawa. There's one. And I don't like that bill anyway, and you know that.
Would you yield?
That's right.
You know we've got a few we could list
two
here.
bills together. You're right. Any one of you name 5 things that you did in this committee over a 2-year period on a bipartisan basis.
Mr. Graves?
You can't name 5 things you did on a
Graves, would you
bipartisan
yield?
basis. Go.
We yield. We took, from the Subcommittee on Indigenous Peoples, we took multiple bills over 3 days to the floor of the House, and they were all bipartisan. And I could send you the list of those bills. Every one of them had bipartisan support. We passed them out of the House, and so I'll send you the list.
You're talking about Native American bills that were introduced by various members of Congress that in many cases date back years. I mean, that's like naming post offices in some cases. Some of them were significant in land transfers and things along those lines. I get it. But in regard to us working on things, the big bills that we moved through this committee, nothing happened. Mr. Huffman, you and I did.
The gentleman yield?
You and I did. No, because I'm about
We
to
did
be
a
at.
meaningful bill that
I
became a
don't think
law
I yielded.
together, you and
I
me.
don't think I yielded. Mr. Huffman, look, you and I did a bill together. We did. But I'm going to say it again. Just because we've switched from the majority to minority, to suddenly hear people sitting there saying that we now need to be working on a bipartisan basis is laughable based upon what we've experienced in the last few years and the damage that the minority has done to the American public.
Gentleman's time has expired. Does any other member wish to speak on Mr. Grijalva's amendment? Ms. Sansbury.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start also by congratulating you on your chairmanship and also take a moment, Mr. Chairman, with your permission to wish a happy birthday to Mr. Graves because you and I share a birthday, which was yesterday. So happy birthday. Mr. Chairman, I do support this amendment. I think it's important that there are guardrails around our subpoena power. Obviously, our role is in oversight, but I would like to yield to my colleague, Mr. Neguse from Colorado. Thank you.
I thank the gentlelady, and I wish her a happy birthday, and I wish happy birthday to my friend from Louisiana as well. And at the risk of engaging Mr. Graves after such a tour de force, I should resist the temptation, but nonetheless, we'll just simply say first with respect to bipartisanship, I mean, again, we're going to have a thorough and robust debate about all the issues that Mr. Graves articulated. In the last Congress, I chaired the Public Lands Subcommittee. Mr. Fulcher was a fantastic ranking member working alongside us. We moved over 60 bills out of our subcommittee. Almost a third of them were bipartisan bills. You asked for 5. I can go through more than 5 bills of my own that moved through this committee, either on the suspension calendar or on the floor, many of which got to the president's desk on a bipartisan basis. In any event, that's really not the point of this conversation. Taking it back to where we started, this is not about any of the policy issues that Mr. Graves described. It is simply about a rule that included a safeguard that the Republican ranking member, Mr. Bishop, whom I know many of you have great respect for, insisted upon, and that Chairman Grijalva agreed to provide in an act of comity and collegiality. And that rule is a pretty simple rule, that the chair could engage in whatever unilateral subpoena they'd like, just give the text of the subpoena 7 days' notice to the chair of the text of the subpoena and the rationale. It doesn't give the chair, ranking member any ability to stop the subpoena. So I'm trying to understand, because I agree with Mr. Graves about the broader point regarding the race to the bottom that I think this institution is engaged in. And we can have a reasonable debate about which side started which precedent and vice versa. And that might extend, by the way, to some of these other amendments. But on this amendment, there can be no intellectually honest debate. This was a rule, as Mr. Huffman said, that the majority imposed, that it didn't have to impose. It did it to protect the rights of the minority. Republican majority is taking that away, and it is likely to never return after it's taken away. So that's all I'm, I guess, trying to help our colleagues understand the stakes of this particular amendment vote. And I'm happy to yield to the happy to yield back to the gentlewoman from New Mexico to the extent that the gentleman from California wishes to weigh in. Perhaps she wants to yield to him.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady yields to Mr. Huffman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Mr. Huffman, you're recognized.
I really can't improve on what Mr. Neguse just said, so I'll associate myself with those remarks. And yeah, the list of bipartisan things that we did in this committee is long, certainly a lot longer than 5. The list of bipartisan things we tried to do, but sometimes it was the sound of one hand clapping, is even longer. So with that, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady.
Yields back.
The gentlelady yields back. Does any member wish to be recognized on Mr. Grijalva's amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Grijalva. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. Recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. Again, recognize Ranking Member Grijalva for the purpose of offering Grijalva number 2. Without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. When the pandemic hit in 2020, this committee had to adjust quickly to keep doing its work and serving the American people. I'm proud of what we were able to find, that we were able to find ways to keep the committee functioning at full capacity. One of the changes that we were forced to adapt was remote participation by our members. I will note that we already allowed remote witnesses before the pandemic in some cases. But in 2020, we quickly realized inviting remote witnesses, we were able to bring Congress to people. We heard views, perspectives from cultures and from peoples that had not had access to and been part of the congressional process, and people that could not come to DC. Remote testimony was particularly helpful for our Natural Resources Committee because our jurisdiction includes distant places like Northern Mariana Islands and Guam, remote tribes, Alaska Native villages, and Native Hawaiian communities. Thanks to the remote authorities that we had, we heard from tribal members who struggled with addiction in their youth, but who are now dedicated his life to helping tribal youth deal with addictions. Because we were able to testify remotely, we had to leave the people he was trying to save. So he stayed. He was able to not keep his job, stay at his job, and be there constantly. A witness from the University of Guam saved 50 hours and $2,000 in travel and lodging expenses. A hearing on the accessibility of our public lands to people with disabilities was held, with all 4 witnesses testifying remotely. The witnesses were not invited just by Democrats, and they weren't just not just during the peak COVID time. After witnesses were able to testify in person again when pandemic restrictions were eased, Republicans in the committee invited dozens of witnesses to testify remotely. I'm sure they were glad to be able. I'm sure they were glad to be able to hear from them. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle also participated in hearings remotely. Who can forget Representative Graves' appearance in the district next to a dead alligator? There are certainly advantages to in-person hearings. I don't doubt that, and I support that. But those advantages accrue to us, not to our witnesses. The drawbacks of an in-person only policy hurts the American people far more than it hurts us. We cannot begin to shut the most distant or marginalized people out of our own government and the right that they have to try to reach out to us. Having the option for remote testimony is no longer a COVID issue. It is a democracy issue. It brings to us a very simple question. Do we think that Congress should hear only from those close enough to DC or rich enough or healthy enough to make it here? Or instead, do we want to hear from the folks who couldn't get off work, who couldn't afford a babysitter, much less a plane ticket and a DC hotel, who live in a different part of the globe or who otherwise struggle to travel? House Republicans have answered that question by changing the rules regarding remote participation. Remote witnesses are allowed only if approvals are granted by the chair of the committee and the majority leader himself. My amendment would simply require the chair to approve requests for virtual participation to a specific group of witnesses from insular, Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian, or indigenous communities and send them on to Republican leadership for approval. I urge my colleagues to choose to hear from the American people and choose to hear from those that have the greatest difficulty in accessing and being present with us. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I do oppose this amendment. For one thing, it is unnecessary. There's nothing in our rules that would preclude a remote witness. There's nothing in the House rules that would preclude a remote witness. The Committee of Natural Resources has a practice of permitting certain witnesses, especially those from distant areas, to testify remotely under appropriate circumstances. And the pandemic is over. I think we all suffered through enough remote hearings and enough remote witnesses. And I know I'm, for one, am excited to get witnesses back in the committee hearing room so that they can be questioned in person. And I believe that's a feeling that most of Congress is ready to put in the rearview mirror, are remote hearings and remote meetings. That nevertheless does not mean that we can't make an exception. And what this amendment would do would say that if the ranking member requests somebody to be able to testify remotely, that it has to be accepted. And again, I think it's unnecessary. I oppose it. And is there anybody else who would like to be recognized?
Yeah.
Mr. Case, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And let me take the opportunity to also congratulate you on your chairship. I appreciate very much this personal note. That's a very, very nice touch and a nice start. And I look forward to welcoming you to a site visit to the tropical forests of our country. I know you're familiar with the other forests, but I think you need to understand the tropical forests. So we look forward to that. And I also want to take the opportunity to welcome my fellow members from the islands. It's interesting that we have representation on this committee from Samoa, from Puerto Rico, from Guam, from the Northern Marianas, and yes, from Alaska, because Alaska is the largest island. And this is the Island Caucus. We are the first and last line of defense against continental-centric thinking on this committee and this Congress. So don't mess with the islands when it comes to that. And speaking of which, Mr. Chair, I appreciate your assurance, but I think that this amendment is necessary for two reasons. I think first, and by the way, I would say that to your comments, I really, really regret that the whole issue of whether there should or shouldn't be, remote witnesses or remote voting or whatever the case may be, has become embroiled and caught up really in a highly partisan debate over the pandemic, because it obscures really a more rational review and investigation and conclusion set about whether and to what extent we do allow participation remotely. Now, I'm not going to get into the proxy voting in this context, and certainly I don't feel the need to have any sympathy applied to my situation, being from an island 6 time zones away and 10 hours away. It's not as bad as some of my colleagues. Believe me, I don't feel sorry for myself having to go home to Hawaii, even if it's a long flight. But the fact of the matter is that this should be about accessibility to Congress. It shouldn't be about a pandemic. It shouldn't be about anything else. It should be about how do we provide accessibility, especially to communities that have a harder time accessing Congress and being available to Congress. The fact of the matter is that the island communities in our country are harder to get to and from. It is harder to get witnesses from there to participate personally before Congress. And we are talking, when we talk about the indigenous communities of our country, we are talking about some of the communities that are the most disenfranchised, do have the highest degree of difficulty in terms of accessing and participating personally in Congress. And I believe that they are entitled to some special consideration. Now, there are situations, obviously, on the continent and elsewhere that are comparable, but these communities, whether they be island communities within the jurisdiction of the Indian and Insular Affairs Subcommittee, that I think do deserve a special consideration. I think this is about us trying to include them as opposed to exclude them. I think it is about us shifting our focus from our convenience in terms of participation to their convenience in terms of participation. And I think this is simply about assuring that in a situation where a possibly problematic witness that the majority does not particularly want to welcome to the committee can in fact participate, that degree of difficulty in participating is not somehow utilized as an excuse for that testimony to be rejected. And so I would urge you to give some serious consideration to this amendment for all of those purposes. I support the amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? Mr. Curtis, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I'm over here looking for my note from you, and I can't find it. And was there some candy I missed too, Mr. Chairman?
It's in the mail.
Okay, good. First of all, delighted to be back with you. It's some of you I've worked with and enjoy our relationship. And I want to weigh in on this because I think there's a point that hasn't been made I'm going to try to make, and that is my observation is there is something that cannot be duplicated in person remotely. And if I could pick on my friend Mr. Graves for just a moment, he a moment ago had an exchange that could be viewed as maybe tough, and then he was able to go to the other side of the room and sit down and talk with you and laugh with you and share some thoughts, right? That cannot be duplicated remotely. And when a witness comes and you have a few minutes before the hearing to talk with the witness and you have a few minutes after and you can see and feel the emotions, you just cannot duplicate that remotely. And I think I'll speak, I believe it's the intent of the majority, among other things, to capture that as much as possible in our hearings. And the opportunity for exceptions, I think, is important and valid. I think you all bring up cases where there might be somebody who we desperately want to have here and it just isn't feasible, whether it's health-wise or otherwise to come, and I have no doubt that those exceptions would be granted. But I just wanted to really emphasize how valuable in-person connections are and how much more valuable they are than remote connections. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Savon, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to say congratulations on assuming chairmanship of the committee, sir. Looking forward to working with you. And also, it's nice to see so many of you back, and of course, now the territories have taken over 4 seats here, right? Growing. Hopefully it doesn't grow, it decreases. But, Mr. Chairman, I support the remote participation of witnesses in committee hearings. Of course, I am one who enjoyed that rare privilege where I was able to actually, I think, attend every business meeting the committee had that starts at 12 in the morning here. At 12 noon, I'm sorry. Starts at noon, I'm present, whether I'm 15 time zones ahead or 8,000 miles ahead. I think I had a perfect attendance. But of course, as conditions now are improving, this emergency is going to be removed, and we would transition to life better prepared to live with the virus. But this will continue to allow committee work to continue as it been in pre-pandemic times, requiring in-person member participation. I should remind this committee that under both Republican and Democratic majorities, allowing hearing witnesses to testify remotely has been fairly common, even before the pandemic, and I have had 2-3 witnesses, I think, from my district testify, although they did have to get up at midnight and come to the district office and join us. But it's worth it. It's from a businessman to as just a citizen to even a very young constituent pleading with this committee to please allow her parents, who are foreign nationals, to continue working in the Marianas. This child then, who's now a grown lady, is someone born in the territories, I mean the Northern Mariana Islands, and pleading that her parents would have to move away. And we did. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that effort 2 Congresses ago. Thank you also for our effort in the last Congress, where we were able to get a bill out and then have one of your colleagues on the other side with votes against it. I had to take it out of the amendment. But it's true, Alaska, Hawaii, and the insular areas, especially those of us in the Pacific, where Samoa, Guam, and the Northern Marianas, Mr. Moylan's district and my district are both nearly 8,000 miles away and 15 time zones ahead from DC. Yes, it's 2 in the morning tomorrow there. And it really, the trip here from my district to DC is grueling. It's actually torture going back because it takes me about 28 hours to get here, if I'm lucky, and about 36 hours to get home. So yeah, it's torture. It's difficult, but hey, I have to be here. I try my best. And yeah, I'm just, for those reasons, Mr. Chairman, I support the Grijalva amendment in this issue, and I thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Colorado is recognized. Ms. Bobert.
Mr. Chairman, I just have a clarifying question. Have you agreed that we would make accommodations for non-governmental employees who would like to testify, that we would like to have appear in the hearing as witnesses remotely for those who are extremely far away and may not have the means to travel here?
House rules allow that, and the committee rules as written allow that, but it is at the discretion of the chair.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Lady yields back. Gentlewoman is recognized. Ms. Patola.
Thank you. First of all, I made a grave omission earlier when I spoke. I neglected to congratulate you on your chairmanship, and I'm very embarrassed about that. So congratulations on your chairmanship. I have been compelled to speak on this because, like Mr. Case, I come from a very remote district. It's about 8 hours flying time, and I'm very relieved to hear you say and hear a confirmation again that you do intend to allow for exceptions, and I agree with Mr. Curtis that there's nothing like person-to-person contact, eye-to-eye communication. But there are occasions where weather might preclude someone from being able to come or not have, it's thousands of dollars for an Alaskan to make it all the way over here. It's a pretty long haul. I just felt like I had to say that, and I'm happy to yield back the time. Thank you.
Lady yields. Anyone else wish to be recognized? Mr. Stauber, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do want to say, Ranking Member Grijalva, I want to say that I enjoyed working with you. I've said this personally to you, and I want to say it publicly, you were a gracious chair, and I anticipate Mr. Westerman is going to do the same. And with that being said, I think Mr. Case brings up a very good point about allowing the American people to see us work. I will submit to Mr. Case that I think you're going to see this Natural Resources Committee led by Chairman Westerman actually have field hearings out with the American people. And I think you'll see the ranking members or chair of the subcommittees having field hearings out with the American people. So I agree with you on that. One of the things that was brought up, and we have to reiterate, was this is the chair's decision. It's his prerogative. He never said absolutely not. There are exceptions, but it's the chair's prerogative, and I think that's important to recognize. I will say that as we go forward, we have a lot of work to do on this committee, and I want to congratulate all of us and the new members on both sides of the aisle. I believe this is one of the most important committees in the House. For those of you who are on this committee, it's probably an A committee for you because of your natural resources or your love for our environment. And I am looking forward to working with you all. And Chair Westerman, I am very, very happy to see you with the gavel. You come with a lot of experience, and you've shown us a lot of experience, and you've shown us your leadership as a ranking member and now as the chair. And I am grateful to be an honor to serve under you, not only as a member, but the ranking member of the chair of Energy and Minerals Resources. So I think that we're off to a pretty good start. There's been good conversations, and for those of you new members who haven't seen the Graves-Huffman contest, you just saw the start, but I know those two men, and they're passionate. Mr. Huffman and I are going to work on something very unrelated to natural resources. It's about special education. We all have our passions. You will see me passionate about my economic drivers in my state and this country, and I look forward to those passionate discussions. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Stands where you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And in addition to congratulating you, I do want to take a moment to congratulate all of the new members who are here today on both sides of the aisle. It's really a joy, and even though this can be a committee with a lot of challenging conversations, I think the work, as Mr. Stauber said, is so critically important for the American people, and that is why I am in strong support of this amendment. And I want to just make a few points here. I think we've already discussed, Mr. Chairman, that this amendment is really about equity. It's about transparency, it's about participation, and it's about ensuring that the people who elected us to this body can meaningfully participate in the people's house. That's why we're here, because the people back home elected us. And as has already been mentioned, many of the representatives sitting around the dais this morning come from some of the most remote parts of this great nation, whether that's the territories, the islands, our indigenous communities, and for myself and Representative Ledger Fernandez, New Mexico, even though it is in the middle of the country, the American Southwest, some of our communities are in some of the most remote parts of the country. It takes an entire day to get here, and the expense of coming to this body to be able to participate costs thousands of dollars. People have to take time off from their jobs. If they're low income, the economic hardship of it. And what I think is really important to acknowledge is that the pandemic created opportunities that did not exist prior to this time. Now, we can't know what the founding fathers would have thought if Zoom and YouTube had existed in their time. But what I do know is that the founding fathers had a vision for this body, that we would be the people's house, that we would be their voices, and that we would have maximum participation so that people could participate in the process. And so the opportunity to use technology so that the people who elected us to this body can participate as witnesses in our hearings is crucial. So I say that we seize this opportunity, we use this technology, and we continue to open our doors to the people who elected us to be here, because it's important. It's our jobs. It's why we're here. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Anyone else wish to be recognized? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Ranking Member Grijalva. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. It's my understanding that Grijalva number 3 has been...
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I would ask unanimous consent, concurrence to withdraw that amendment.
Without objection. We'll move on to Huffman number 1. I recognize Mr. Huffman for the purpose of offering an amendment, and without objection, the amendment is considered read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and congratulations to all the new members of this committee on both sides of the aisle. I look forward to getting to know all of you and working together. I would much rather be spending our time here in the committee discussing major issues of policy, but unfortunately we need to address a major issue of safety. for members of our committee and our staff so that we can conduct our business with a reasonable level of common sense and security. The language in my amendment, Mr. Chairman, was included in the adopted rules of the 117th Congress, but it was removed by the new Republican majority from the proposed rules of this Congress. And my amendment explicitly prohibits carrying or having readily available any firearm, dangerous weapon, explosive, or incendiary device within the hearing rooms and conference rooms of this committee. The language provides a narrow exception for unloaded and secured exhibits by invitation of the full committee chair or law enforcement and service members who are engaged in the performance of their duties, and also construction or demolition work with approval of the Capitol Police Board and certification of the architect of the Capitol. And to be clear, members and their staff are already prohibited by law from carrying guns into the hearing rooms and conference rooms of this Capitol. Currently, under statute and Capitol Police Board regulation, members are supposed to have firearms only in their offices. The law narrowly allows transporting the firearms to and from their offices from off-campus if they are unloaded and securely wrapped. This does not allow for carrying firearms into hearing rooms, and it doesn't allow for walking around the Capitol with a loaded weapon. But we know that some members think these rules do not apply to them. They have vowed to take guns everywhere, and they have tried to bring guns into the House chamber and other places where they are prohibited. Let me be clear with this amendment. What it says is that in this committee room, we will follow the law and we will follow the rules. I wish this amendment wasn't necessary, but unfortunately, it is. We have too many members who have incited and advocated armed political violence. That is really unfortunate, but it is just a fact. They have attempted to bring concealed weapons onto the House floor. They have distributed by hand supposedly inert grenades and promised to continue flouting House rules. And some have reveled in the removal of the magnetometers at the House chamber that were there to prevent something truly awful from happening. They have openly fetishized guns and violence to the point where one of my colleagues across the aisle was removed from their committee assignments for portraying himself killing another member who sits on this very same committee. Again, unfortunate, uncomfortable, but true that many members of this body were neck deep in the January 6th insurrection, inspiring it, aiding, abetting, cheering, and after the fact, gaslighting about what it even was. This amendment is sadly necessary, and I welcome support from all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who care about providing a safe working environment for all of us and our staff. The majority's decision to eliminate the prohibition on carrying or having readily available accessible firearms and dangerous weapons is disturbing, and it certainly should not be their first order of business in this committee. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I do oppose this amendment because this amendment is unnecessary. It is not a necessary amendment. And at the committee's organizational meeting in the last Congress, I made clear that I stand firmly in support of the Second Amendment. I said that no other committee has such a provision in their rules, and that remains true today. As I said last Congress, this is not an appropriate subject matter for consideration in our committee rules. And as I said last Congress, one day Republicans will be in the majority and set the rules. That day has come. I oppose the amendment, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Does anybody else wish to be
Mr. Chairman.
recognized? Ms. Boebert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak in opposition to the gentleman from California's political anti-member safety amendment. I really was hoping that we could be friends. You and I have had some great laughs over this right here that happened in our committee hearing. And I am personally looking forward to moving past political stunts like this, like the one that you're proposing today, the gentleman is proposing, and address the real issues facing this committee, like Western water, which is so important to both of our districts. I do want to congratulate the gentleman on his subcommittee ranking member position. I genuinely look forward to working with you on the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee. But regarding this amendment, I have consistently heard the gentleman speak in this very committee about how we shouldn't have discussions like this wasting time on political stunts. Yet, that's exactly what he's doing here, and his hypocrisy is on full display. It seems like my colleague from California forgot his tinfoil hat today, so brought this here for you, just as a little reminder. But the real question is, why did he choose to waste everyone's time today even bothering to file this amendment? Was it to generate donations from the Giffords PAC or the NRDC trial lawyers? May I remind the gentleman that the U.S. Capitol Police Board's current regulations authorizes members of Congress to transport firearms on Capitol campus everywhere except for 3 very specific locations. Not a single one of those 3 locations is the committee room. So the gentleman is asking this committee to prohibit something that 35 other committees will allow and won't prohibit this Congress. That really doesn't make any sense. The current regulations allow members of Congress to carry and have, that allow us to carry, have helped protect members since 1967. And there are substantial precedents for this type of regulation as more than 24 states allow guns in their Capitol buildings. Furthermore, if the gentleman's anti-member safety amendment somehow passed, which it won't, how would it be enforced exactly? Is the gentleman going to dig up Pelosi's now disposed House floor magnetometers in the junkyard? Or is he going to require Capitol police officers to guard every entrance of this committee room and ask them to stop and frisk members as we've been stopped and frisked for the past 2 years? You know, I'm actually really enjoying the United States Capitol to start feeling like America again, a little more freedom. But not only does this trigger constitutional concerns, as does every firearm regulation and unconstitutional law, but the costs and manpower alone just are unjustifiable. The gentleman is honestly just wasting time with this amendment, with threats against members of Congress at an all-time high. I would like to remind the gentleman that now is not the time to be stripping members of our constitutional right to defend ourselves. Washington, D.C. has a violent crime problem that is often 150% higher than the national average. Furthermore, there is a history of violent attacks on members of Congress and Capitol Police. For instance, in March of 1954, 4 members of the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party opened fire onto the House floor. 5 congressmen were wounded in that shooting. And then in July of 1998, a gunman entered the Capitol through a member and employee entrance with a 6-shot revolver. And when the magnetometer went off, the gunman shot a Capitol police officer in the head, engaged in a gunfight, and entered the office of the Majority Whip. In June of 2017, at a congressional baseball practice attended by 24 members of Congress, a Bernie Sanders supporting unhinged gunman opened fire and seriously injured Whip Scalise. Without his security detail being present, that threat would have not been neutralized. And may I also remind the gentleman that Gabby Giffords and 18 others were shot at one of her congressional events in her district. 6 people died, including a 9-year-old. And just last year, a man rushed the stage and tried to stab my friend, Congressman Lee Zeldin, at a campaign rally in New York. We have the right to defend ourselves, and we're going to defend that right to keep that in America. And clearly, there are unhinged people, and we have to be able to stop that threat, protect ourselves against it. And I understand that the gentleman wanted to play some games today, so I thought I would indulge a little bit, but I strongly urge defeat of this political stunt amendment. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
So, ladies, time has expired. Any other member? Mr. Gallego.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I also noticed that the member from Colorado forgot to mention January 6th as also an assault on representatives.
Yes, it was awful when Ashley Babbitt was murdered.
Wow. And you don't care about the 100 other police officers. I do have some questions on it. So the gentlelady from Colorado said that members are allowed to bring weapons into committee rooms. What is the chair's understanding? Are members allowed to bring weapons to the committee room or not? Because I think that's a question of the necessity of this amendment.
The chair follows the rules of the House.
No, I agree that. Now, what is the rule of the House, in your opinion, Mr. Chair? Well, you're going to be the enforcer of this, Mr. Chair. That's why I'm asking. Is it your opinion that a member can bring a weapon here?
The Capitol Police are the enforcer of the rules.
Okay, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Chair, but, I think right now we're debating whether this is a necessary amendment versus not. Now, let's say we don't believe that we have any level of enforcement for a member. Maybe we could also talk about some legitimate other type of restraints. So it's someone who owns a weapon and used a weapon in combat and slept next to a weapon loaded for 7 months straight in combat. I would hope that we at least have some pretty sane restrictions, like is the member supposed to have positive control of the weapon at all times? What condition is this weapon supposed to be in? Do we want a weapon to be in condition 1 this whole time? So this is why I'm asking. If you think that the interpretation is that they are allowed to have it, then let's have a debate about what is proper weapons handling versus the issue of yes or no. If you want, you would like me to appeal to someone else, I would likely. I'm not trying to get you. I got you, Mr. Chairman. I just think this is a legitimate. We're talking about weapons, and we say we have a right to bring weapons. Okay, then let's talk about some logical, safe weapons handling restrictions. Mr. Chairman, again. So here's my concern, right? There are some people in this committee who are very well trained with weapons. There are some people here that are not very well trained with weapons, but like to use it as a prop. My fear, especially because we're dealing with a very crowded area, is that some people may bring a weapon and have a discharge. That would be tragic. Now, I think there's ways for you to defend yourself, protect yourself, at the same time have some sane weapons handling restrictions that you would have in any other public setting. And yes, a lot of states do have different rules about bringing weapons, but even then, onto the floor or into offices, but even then, some of them have very simple restrictions. State of Arizona, you're supposed to tell the state police that's guarding the Capitol that you have a weapon, right? So if we're gonna do this, like, why not actually be sane about this and actually have some very basic weapons handling restrictions that anybody that owns weapons, I know, Mr. Westerman, you own weapons, you understand what I'm talking about, the responsibility of someone who owns weapons and what you're supposed to do to make sure you keep yourself safe as well as keep everyone else around you.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. So there are conditions in which we are required to carry our firearms within the Capitol, and no one is saying that we're going outside of those rules. To transport a firearm, there's 5 conditions that the firearm must be in. We're just saying that this amendment is unnecessary because there is a rule in place about how you would carry a firearm throughout the Capitol complex, members of Congress.
Let me take my time back. The problem is that the chairman is not actually being clear.
He said he would follow House rules.
But it's not clarifying what House rules. He's saying the enforcement is on the Capitol side. And we're not clarifying what condition you should be carrying your weapon in either. I mean, that's I think it's a legitimate, if somebody wants to come in here and have a weapon in condition 1 for a pistol, it's entirely different from a condition where it's loaded with chamber in the round, but there's a safety. We have weapons that don't have safety. I'm just saying there's a lot of people here that I believe, and you're not one of them, Mrs. Boebert, that I would not necessarily trust with a loaded weapon. And I think it's better that we have some guardrails
Thank you for clarifying that.
For some guardrails for that. Because I think that's a very, sane thing. We should always have guardrails for people that are using their weapons and or, especially in a crowded area, especially in the history that we have in this, how things may get heated once in a while in these committees. That's all. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Westerman. If I can just address this real quick from a personal perspective, because clearly this has become highly politicized. During my 2022 election, I was actually threatened by a guy who had basically said that he was going to have me shot at close range proximity. That's not my only experience with firearms. When I was in high school, I was actually at a campus where there was a gang shooting. And so obviously I take firearm safety very seriously, but I also take my personal safety seriously. And I just want to clarify something. To tell members, especially members that have been threatened, female members, I don't know if you guys know this, but are likely more targeted than male members because of the fact that we're looked at as victims, right? But to tell us that we don't have the ability to defend ourselves because of, for whatever happened on January 6th is wrong. I reserve that right to defend myself. I reserve the right to carry my firearm in whatever capacity I want to without your permission. And to bring that to this discussion when this is something that has nothing to do with natural resources is wrong. And so I know that you brought up your military training. Well, I'm also a veteran. And I believe that people have the right to defend themselves and that you don't have the authority to sit there and lecture our chairman on whatever policy that you have in perspective for whatever reason. Representative Boebert brought up a great point. Anyone that has a concealed carry in this area has to go through training as well. And so please remove that. It's a very obviously sensitive topic for those of us that have actually been threatened and seen violence. And for you to sit there and use your military service, I don't know why you would ever do that. And I do not yield my time. Thank you, Chairman.
Gentlelady, yield back. Does anybody else wish to be recognized?
You wish to be recognized?
Mr. Case, you're recognized for 5
I
minutes.
yield 1 minute to the gentleman from Arizona.
Thank you, from the gentleman from Hawaii. There seems to be some confusion here. I'm not lecturing the chairman. I'm asking the chairman for some clarification. And number two, it's my understanding you don't need to have a CCW in order for you to bring a weapon onto the campus. As a matter of fact, much like some states, my state is a non-CCW state. You could just bring a weapon wherever you want. So, number one, assuming that everyone has proper weapons training, that's not a good assumption, right? So what I'm saying is that I believe you have a right to defend yourself. I think everyone has a right to defend themselves. But you also have the dual responsibility, and you know as a gun owner, to also use your weapon and store it and handle it in a safe manner. Now, since we don't have any clarification about who's going to actually enforce it, whether there's any enforcement capability, what I'm questioning is whether or not we should just have sane, previously established weapons handling regulations that have been endorsed and enforced, not endorsed, by places like the NRA and other, weapons organizations that have trained many of us. That's all the question is. Now, the chairman can't answer the question. I get that because it puts him in a very sticky situation. But again, my thesis on all of this is that if we're going to allow this to happen...
The gentleman's time has expired.
Oh, no, it was... Oh, you didn't admit it. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chairman.
I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Huffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just to finish... Oh, to Mr. Huffman. Is that okay? Yeah. I yield back.
Mr. Huffman,
that's
you're
fine.
recognized.
I did my point.
We're close, but not that close.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I have rarely seen you at a loss for words. But I can think of nothing more important for us to know on this important issue than whether you, as chairman of this committee, agree that the House rules prohibit members from bringing firearms into this committee room. It's basic stuff. And when you refuse to answer how you interpret that House rule, it's pretty hard to accept at face value the arguments we're hearing from across the aisle that this amendment isn't necessary. So let me try one more time. Mr. Chairman, do you believe that the House rules prohibit members from bringing firearms into this committee room?
Mr. Huffman, even though I'm not compelled to colloquy with you, I will
It's a yes or no question, so please,
this
shouldn't take too long.
This is a subject matter for the House Administration Committee. As I mentioned before, no other committee has this restriction in place. It was only put in place in this committee in the last Congress.
You're not going to answer
Therefore,
the question, are you?
It's an unnecessary amendment.
I'm going to reclaim my
and I
time.
oppose- and I oppose the
Unfortunately,
amendment.
because the chair's declining to answer the question, I have to reclaim my time. So now I have another question, because I think we're entitled to know whether this is going to be a safe and secure venue for us to have our political differences. How many members right now, just by show of hands, do not have a weapon on them?
Double check. Yes. These considered weapons.
Interesting. How many members feel like they are so threatened that their security is so compromised here in the fortress of the United States Capitol that they would need to bring weapons.
Mr. Chairman,
into-
is this a Q&A session?
Yeah, it
or
is.
this,
It is, yeah.
so
On my
if-
time, how many members
this
feel
is-
like they
this
would
is out
need
of
to
order,
carry
Mr.
a
Chairman.
weapon?
It's
This is my
the
time.
gentleman's time.
How many members feel like they would need to carry a weapon into our committee hearings? Got
I
one?
feel I need one everywhere here.
Everywhere?
Oftentimes we are
Sure.
harassed in the hallways, we walk
The
alone.
gentleman hasn't yielded.
And just, and would those be loaded weapons, presumably?
Not an unloaded weapon.
Okay, that's helpful to know, too. And of course, we heard reference to the fact that, this amendment is not necessary because the rule prevents taking armed weapons around the Capitol and into the House chamber, but we know there are members across the aisle who have tried to take loaded weapons into the House chamber. And there's been an interception of that, thankfully. So, look, Mr. Chairman, everything I have heard from my colleagues across the aisle, everything you have said and not said on this subject really reaffirms the importance of this common sense safety and security amendment so that we can have our political disagreements, and they will be spirited, but no one should have to worry about members of the other side of the aisle, let alone members who have incited political violence, bringing weapons in violation of House rules into our committee room.
Do you
And I
think we're
yield
going to
back.
hurt you? We will never hurt you.
It's
I
the
would use
gentleman's-
my farm to
does the
defend you,
gentleman
just to be
yield?
clear.
Gentleman's time has expired. Anybody, Mr. Fulcher?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to take a moment to say that if our friends on the other side of this issue want to take up this issue, they need to do it in the appropriate setting. My understanding is that the chairman has said that this is House rule. It's House rule, it's House rule. And so take up the issue on the specifics of the House rules where that belongs, but it's not here. As I understand it, the amendment wants to remove that right, which is currently House rule. And so this is simply not the place to rewrite House rules.
Mr. Fulcher, would you yield?
No, I won't. Not yet. The other thing I find interesting is that the whole definition of protection, it appears that my friend from California is fearful and wants protection from us. It appears that those of us who don't want to see this rule strip want to have protection from those outside. I, for one, have more trust in us than necessarily who would be threatening us from the outside. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to be recognized? Ms.
Was
Dove?
the gentleman yielding any of his time? I had asked the gentleman if he would yield.
I've yielded back.
The gentleman has
Sure.
yielded back. Ms. Dove, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I have to apologize because I am new. I did not congratulate you on becoming chair of the committee, so I hope you didn't take offense. I also have some clarifying questions about this whole issue. One, is it the opinion of the chair that members of this committee are also protectors of and enforcers for other members on this committee? I don't know that I saw that anywhere in the rules.
The rules do not address that.
Right, okay, thank you, because I don't know that anyone got elected to protect someone else in Congress or on this committee. I also, it seems like some of these comments are disparaging against the Capitol Police, who I believe come here every day, working really hard to make sure that these facilities are safe. Is it your opinion that, well, I guess I'd like to get some clarification on explosives and why explosives would be needed in the committee? Has there ever been a time when we've needed to use them?
Does the gentlelady yield back?
Not quite yet. I guess I'll ask another one. Is it also the opinion of the chair that firearms should be placed out in the open as well? I mean, I've served in the State House, and this is all very new to me, so I'm just asking some clarifying questions, and I yield back.
It's the opinion of the chair that we will follow House rules. The gentlelady yields back. Does anybody else wish to be recognized? Mr. Bentz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations.
Mr. Bentz? Mr.
Yes.
Bentz? I'm sorry, the gentleman from Colorado had asked earlier.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a quick clarification for Mr. Huffman. Whenever I'm asked questions like, do you own firearms, and are you carrying, do you want to carry? I don't answer those questions. So I didn't raise my hand earlier because I just don't participate. I don't go there. So don't read anything into my lack of response. I want to keep the bad guys guessing. So that's why I just don't go there. So don't read anything into my lack of response. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Anybody else wish to be recognized? Mr. Grijalva.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, the genesis of what we're talking about occurred last Congress when we changed the language to affect the committee rules. Guns are explicitly not allowed in the House chamber, the Speaker's lobby, and certain other specified rooms. And it was the feeling of the majority that we were going to be consistent as a committee with those rules. What others do and don't do, that's another prerogative. That was our prerogative. And we did that, I really believe, in the wake of the January 6th, and partly because some members have made comments suggested that people intended to bring weapons to the People's House. And I heard from many members, and we continue to hear from others, and from staff who feel unsafe as we see more and more gun violence, especially political violence. So the issue is important. It's about public safety. And the gentlelady from Colorado reminded me of the horrific shooting in Tucson in 2011. One of our colleagues, Gabby Giffords, and a federal judge and 6 other individuals were killed and 12 wounded. All those lives shattered. And all because they were simply engaged in the purest form of democracy, being at the street corner to meet with their member of Congress. I reflect on that because that was one of the motivations as well for the amendment. I think Congress should conduct its business without wondering whether we are moments away from any level of violence. My colleagues have talked a lot about reopening the People's House after January 6th. Well, I think if it's any lesson to be learned, is that public safety and this committee setting a standard for itself and for other committees in terms of the fact that this is a nonviolent site where business is done the best it can be done, and the whole idea of arguing the Second Amendment or anything else at this committee meeting is irrelevant. What is talking about is public safety, and I support the amendment. I urge its adoption. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Bentz, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on assuming the chairmanship. For those who have the time or the inclination to actually read up on this issue, Mr. Huffman, you might want to look at the United States Capitol Police webpage, which I'm sure you're familiar with. But I think the one that is probably best suited to talk about this issue is Ms. Congresswoman Boebert, so I yield to her.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. So I just wanted to clarify, we had mentioned, it was mentioned on the other side of the aisle, that not everyone who brings a firearm into the Capitol has had training. Well, in order to legally get a firearm into the Capitol, a member of Congress would have had to go through the Washington, D.C. concealed carry weapons training course to bring that in legally, which I've done, which many colleagues have done. And I invite you all to come and take the class. You don't have to get the permit. You don't have to shoot a gun, but take the class. See what the laws are here in Washington, D.C. See the statistics. See how reasonable and safe it is to carry a firearm, to possess one. And you know, there's so many things that are being mentioned on the other side of the aisle. January 6th keeps being brought up. First of all, Republicans didn't incite that. I mean, it's horrible rhetoric for you to keep this up. You know, I'm probably one of the few Republicans that wanted to continue with the January 6th committee because I want the truth out to the American people. I'm tired of you guys running and lying about this and continuously creating this false narrative for the American people. But on January 6th, I was following House rules. There's 3 places where members of Congress cannot carry a firearm. One of them is the House floors. And I was abiding by those rules. And when I heard those doors shaking, I didn't know what was on the other side. And it was the first time in many, many years that I have been unprotected, that I was disarmed, not unarmed, disarmed, because I was not allowed to possess my firearm. Capitol Police officers didn't have enough help. Thank God there were members who had their firearms anyway in the House chambers and were helping Capitol Police. And Capitol Police were grateful for their assistance because they were outnumbered significantly. A few months after that, there was a staffer that accidentally brought in a firearm in his bag, ran it through security, and it was minutes, more than 10 minutes, before anyone tracked that staffer down. What if this was somebody with an agenda, with a motive? And then you want us defenseless and not able to protect ourselves? And we don't walk around with Capitol Police officers. Not all of us hire personal security. Most of us like to take that personal responsibility and be our own security when we can. I don't believe that the security of any member here is compromised by having another member of Congress, a highly vetted individual, be able to carry a firearm according to their Second Amendment rights or constitutional rights and defend themselves. But I do want to once again just extend my heartfelt offer to all of you to come and attend a class with me. I host these often so members can obtain their concealed carry weapons permits here in Washington, D.C. Just come and learn on the subject. Hear what our laws are, hear the process of it, and how reasonable it actually is. It's not this big, scary object that's just going to fire on its own. There are safety measures imposed on every firearm, whether there's a safety or not. There are still ways to carry firearms that they're not going to discharge. That's just not something they do. It's an inanimate object. So I appreciate the debate. I look forward to talking more about energy and water and public lands and keeping wolves out of Colorado in the future. But thank you for bringing this up. We can have a little bit of fun in the Natural Resources Committee, and I look forward to defeating this amendment, Mr. Huffman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Young lady yields back. Mr. Bentz, do you?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate the fact that the issues raised by the amendment are addressed in the United States Capitol Police webpage, and so the initial remarks by the chair were correct. This is duplicative and should be voted down. With that, Mr. Chair, I'll yield out whatever time I have left to you.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman recognized.
I'd like to yield to Ms. Canlagadove. No, you go first.
Thank you. I had one other question regarding liability, because while some folks may be trained in how to use a firearm and may use it properly, it is a fact that firearms can be accidentally discharged. It does happen. And so I have a liability question as it relates to members of the public and witnesses and staff who show up to this office, into this committee room, and probably are not thinking that they have to wear Kevlar now. What are the liability concerns and what are the responses to that if a firearm is accidentally discharged?
I would say that the responsibility is the same as it is in every other committee in the House, as no other committee has this rule in the House. We will follow House rules. The gentlelady yield back.
Yes.
I'll just reclaim my time. I'll just note for the record that during the course of today's meeting, I've seen members come and go out of the room as we do and leave coats, leave handbags, et cetera. So I would just reiterate that if there are going to be members who, whether the House rules allow it or not, are going to be bringing firearms in this room, that everybody reacquaint themselves with those safe practices to ensure that firearms are not left unattended in a crowded room in this space. And I yield back.
I agree with the gentleman. Will you yield for a moment?
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Gosar, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
So first of all, a couple misnomers. The gun doesn't discharge by itself. Unlike Alex Baldwin, he did have his finger on the trigger. Number two is, I always thought you guys were the opposition. The enemy was always the Senate. And I think that's what we have to get back down, is to looking at legislation that helps the people. I think this conversation has gone far too long. I think we need to get back to business. Thank you. I yield back.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Thank you. I'd like to take advantage of just a couple of minutes. I spent a decade of my life training firearms for law enforcement, military around the world. I'm a concealed carry permit, and I would just like to say there's probably nothing about this conversation that I like on both sides. And Mr. Huffman, I associate myself with Mr. Lamborn. That's not a question I feel is appropriate to ask, and would never ask that. Maybe under oath I would answer that, but otherwise I'm not going to answer that. Likewise, to my colleagues who flout or fundraise or tout that they have firearms or that they use firearms or carry firearms, I'm equally as disturbed and uncomfortable, and feel like our personal safety is incredibly important, but it's a matter between us and the Capitol Police and our local police and our staff, and trust everybody to take adequate precautions in those. We all live in a situation that is precarious. I'm often amazed that some local officials have an escort of police officers. As a member of 435, I have realized just how disposable I am. And we have actually very little security and protection. And I can understand that bothers my colleagues, and to the extent that they take steps to protect themselves, I support that. And Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield. I yield back my time to Mr.
And one
Gosar.
last comment. The gentleman that actually stopped the carnage in Tucson was a private citizen with a gun, not a police officer.
The gentleman yield back. Mr. Gosar, you yield back. Gentleman yields back. There's Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize if this point is duplicative, but as our chair, you have authority over this committee. You are responsible for the conduct of this committee. You're responsible for the safety of this committee as it pertains to what we enshrine in our rules. And when I heard earlier some individuals asking if you believed or if the chair believes whether members of Congress should be permitted to bring a firearm into this committee, I heard an answer that was essentially, this is duplicative, the House rules are what they are. But members have very different interpretations of these rules. They challenge these rules. And I think it's very, very important as our chair to understand what your specific interpretation of this is. Does the chair believe that members of Congress should be able to bring firearms into the Natural Resources Committee or not?
The chair believes that members of the Natural Resources Committee should follow the House rules and the guidance by the Capitol Police.
Yes, and the House rules, members have different interpretations of what those rules are. I need to know, for a sense of my own personal safety, what your interpretation of the House rules are as it pertains to this issue.
I believe that would be a question you should take up with the House Administration Committee, and they do have a Members' Day, as all committees do.
So am I? I see. So, so we are seeing that that the chair, who is responsible for enforcement of these rules, does not have a specific interpretation of whether firearms should or not be permitted into the committee, or has the committee not consulted House admin on the House administration's interpretation on these rules?
The chair's position is that we will follow the rules of the House.
Okay. I'll have one follow-up question. Has this committee been in communication with the House Administrative Committee about what the conclusion of these rules are?
The committee has not been in consultation with the House administration because this is an amendment that's not necessary. This will be the only committee in Congress that has this amendment. The only time this has ever been in the rules was when it was put in this committee in the last Congress.
So just in summary, the decision as to whether or not the chair believes that firearms should be permitted in this committee is determined by House admin. But the committee has not been in touch with House admin as to whether this should or should not be allowed. And so therefore, we're just going to leave this ambiguous?
I believe it's up to every member of the House to follow the House rules. And I'm sure you can visit with House admin staff at any time.
Will the gentlelady yield for a moment?
One moment. I do want to reiterate the point of liability. I think that if we're in this point of having to just all take our safety into our own hands, then does the chair believe that members of Congress should also be pursuing legal avenues in order to protect ourselves as well?
The chair believes that's an issue to take up with the House admin, and the chair also believes that we should be focusing on the issues that this committee is chartered to focus on.
I agree. Thank you very much. I yield.
Now will the gentlelady
Gentlelady
yield?
just yield a little bit of
Yes,
time before.
yes.
By show of hands, we just had members of this committee indicate that they do plan to bring guns into this committee room.
No, you asked if we would want to.
I
Nobody
also
said
then
planned.
asked who feels
Committee
so
will-
threatened in their safety that they would need to bring guns into this committee room.
That's not saying that even plans to.
Okay, so the indication was in the affirmative when that question was asked. So, Mr. Chairman, to
Many
simply
members
say,
were not taking
simply
part
say,
in the farce,
Some
okay?
of us
Some
simply
didn't
say it's up to
participate.
every
Voting
member to
president.
interpret
The
the
member
rules.
reclaims his time.
When you
The
have
committee will be in
reason, when you
order.
have reason to believe committee members right here intend to bring weapons into this committee room, and Mr. Chairman, we're entitled to your interpretation of the House rules. You need to tell them that that's either okay or not for the safety and security of this committee.
Mr.
And I
Chairman?
yield back to the gentlelady.
I would also just make a request that if this, if the amendment by Mr. Huffman fails, perhaps it would be for the purpose of transparency that at the start of every
Gentlelady's
committee,
time has
we
expired.
ask who is carrying a firearm.
Any other member
Chairman?
wish to?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. McClintock, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I just wonder if the gentleman from California or the gentlelady from New York has reason to believe that there is a homicidal maniac amongst us. If they do, they probably would have brought a gun into this room, whether or not there is a law. And I would challenge them right now to present their name the names and present the evidence before such a catastrophe confronts us.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
ThanI believe it's a
Courtesy, by the way, you didn't give me, but go ahead.
It's a mischaracterization. While I am not here to impugn the character of any individual member of this committee, I do believe that the performance
Of course you
demonstrated
are.
has
Because
shown
Who do you not trust to bring a firearm into a committee room or anywhere else?
I believe that from what I've witnessed, the competence of some members may be something that I would be willing to question.
I think you should give
Thank
us
you.
names before the sun goes down because we're all in great danger if you're correct. But if you're going to name names, I'd like you to present the evidence as well. And if not, then we should draw our own conclusions.
Will the gentleman yield just a bit?
Sure.
First of all, I don't think any member of this committee should have a weapon in this committee room. I believe that's the only reasonable interpretation of the House rules, but what we have heard today, I think reaffirms the concern that that's not how everybody sees it. Some members either aren't interpreting the rules right or think they don't apply to them, and
If the
that is
gentleman
cause
doesn't
for
wish
concern.
to carry a firearm,
And
I
would
invite
just-
him not to carry a firearm.
I would just say in addition that this notion that we're all responsible, vetted individuals, there's nothing to worry about, is pretty cold comfort when we have members of this institution who it turns out weren't so well vetted. We don't really know a lot about each other. And we're finding new and interesting things about some of our colleagues every single day. So, thorough vetting is cold comfort, sir, and I'll yield back.
I would simply, again, invite the gentleman, if he has an accusation to make, then to make it. Otherwise, I think we're all free to judge the seriousness of his position.
Gentleman yields back. Does anyone else wish to speak on the amendment? If there's no further discussion, the question is on the amendment offered by Mr. Huffman. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Yeas and nays, please.
A recorded vote has been requested. Further proceedings on this amendment will be postponed. The unfinished business is the request for recorded votes on amendments to the committee rules. Members will record their votes using the electronic vote system. This is Rosendale 1. The question is on the amendment designated Rosendale 1, on which the ayes prevailed by voice vote. The vote is now open. You can hit the green one if you want, yes. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 26 and the nays are 12.
The amendment is agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Grijalva number 1, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The vote is now open.
It's a good amendment.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 24.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the amendment designated Huffman number 1, on which the noes prevailed by voice vote. The vote is now open.
Sorry, Huffman? Or
The vote will soon be open.
Huffman or Grijalva 2?
Grijalva 3 was withdrawn. Oh, we're on Grijalva 2?
Roll call 3 is
This is Grijalva 2.
All right. All right, this is on Grijalva 2, in which the noes prevailed. The vote is now open.
Sorry. Apologies. Sorry. Sorry, give me a second. Apologies. Can you get David for me? Sorry.
Damn.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 13 and the nays are 25.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is now on the amendment designated Huffman 1, on which the noes prevail by voice vote. The vote will now be open. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 14 and the nays are 25.
The amendment is not agreed to. The question is on the adoption of the committee rules as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it, and the rules as amended are adopted. A recorded vote has been requested. Members will record their vote using the electronic voting system. The vote is now open. It will be open.
The guy was neutral. You should have kept the same vendor.
So,
Need to make sure.
Later.
all right. Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the clerk will close the vote and report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the yeas are 25 and the nays are 14.
The committee rules as amended are adopted without objection. The motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The next order of business is consideration of the committee resolution to... The committee will come to order. The committee has not been adjourned. The committee will come to order. The next order of business is consideration of the committee resolution to appoint Republican and Democratic committee staff under House rules.